The Galactic Federation had, over the course of 12,000 standard cycles, perfected the art of keeping its citizens alive. Not thriving, mind you, just alive. There was a difference, subtle but significant, between the two states of being. When your average Quellan merchant suffered a broken limb, the medical bay could have them back to 80% functionality within 3 solar days. When a Thoraxian diplomat experienced cardiac failure, the emergency response teams could stabilize them in under an hour and have them signing treaties again within a week. The galaxy had grown comfortable, perhaps too comfortable, with the idea that biological fragility was simply the price of civilization. Advanced societies, after all, had moved beyond the barbaric necessities of physical durability. Why waste evolutionary energy on dense bones and redundant organs when you could simply build better hospitals? The logic was sound, the mathematics impeccable, and the results spoke for themselves. Mortality rates across the Federation had plummeted to statistical insignificance. Almost nobody died anymore, at least not from anything as mundane as physical trauma. The thing about comfort, though, is that it breeds a very specific kind of ignorance. When you have never experienced true danger, when your biggest physical threat is tripping over your own manipulator appendages, you begin to forget what danger actually looks like. The civilized species of the galaxy had created a bubble of safety so complete, so all-encompassing, that they had fundamentally lost touch with the concept of resilience. Their medical technology had become a crutch that supported increasingly delicate frames. Humans, as it turned out, had not received that particular memo about becoming delicate. Nobody had thought to inform Earth that evolution was supposed to stop once you invented antibiotics. The planet had simply continued doing what it had always done, which was throwing increasingly creative disasters at its dominant species and seeing who survived. The result was a species that approached galactic standard medical care the way a tank approaches a pillow fight, which is to say with confusion about why everyone else was being so careful. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Let us rewind to the moment when these two philosophies, the wrapped-in-cotton-wool approach of the Federation and the built-like-a-brick approach of humanity, were about to collide. Literally. The Interstellar Military Academy on Station Kepler-7 represented the pinnacle of collaborative defense training. 16 species sent their brightest and most capable to this gleaming monument to unity, where future officers learned the delicate art of not accidentally starting wars with their allies. The station itself was a marvel of engineering. A rotating wheel 3 kilometers in diameter that provided 0.7 standard gravity, which was considered the comfortable middle ground for most species. The Quellan found it a bit heavy, the Thoraxians found it a bit light, and the humans found it absolutely perfect for doing backflips, which they did with disturbing frequency. The Academy's corridors hummed with the controlled chaos of youth, being forged into military precision. Cadets from dozens of worlds rushed between classes, their various appendages carrying datapads, their various sensory organs absorbing tactical theory and diplomatic protocols. The cafeteria served 43 different atmospheric compositions and twice as many dietary requirements. The gymnasium, which is where our story finds its focus, had been specially modified to accommodate species ranging from the methane-breathing Vortelians to the silicon-based crystallids. Lieutenant Jakara, a Quellan tactics instructor with the kind of patience that came from raising 6 offspring simultaneously, oversaw the combat training with the weary resignation of someone who had seen every possible training accident. The Quellan were a pragmatic species, tall and willowy, with iridescent skin that shifted colors with their moods. Currently, Zakara was displaying the pale blue of mild concern, which was her default state during sparring sessions. Among her assistant instructors was Vexthor, a Zentarii who had recently graduated top of his class and accepted a position training the next generation. The Zentarii were a proud species, humanoid in basic layout, but with a natural exoskeleton that gave them a definite advantage in hand-to-hand combat. Vexthor wore his pride like a second skin, which was unfortunate because his actual skin was already doing quite enough work. He moved through the training hall with the swagger of someone who had never lost a sanctioned fight and did not intend to start. The thing about Vexthor was that he was genuinely skilled. His combat scores were exceptional, his tactical thinking sharp, his physical conditioning impeccable by Centauri standards. He had earned his position through merit, which made his attitude problem all the more frustrating. He treated the position not as a responsibility, but as a throne from which to dispense judgment on lesser fighters. And in his estimation, there were a lot of lesser fighters. "Pair up," Jakara called out, her voice carrying the harmonic undertones that made Quellen's speech so pleasant to most species. "Standard sparring protocols. First to 3 touches or submission. Remember, we are training together, not trying to kill each other. Save that enthusiasm for the actual enemy." The cadets began sorting themselves into pairs, with the awkward shuffle of young beings, trying to find someone of roughly equivalent size and skill. The Thoraxian cadets, massive and armored, paired among themselves out of necessity. The Quellen students found each other with relief. The Vortellians floated in their containment suits toward partners who understood their unique combat style. And then there was Marcus Webb, standing alone on the Webbenstud edge of the mat with the uncomfortable posture of someone who knew they were a problem but was not sure how to fix it. Marcus was not the first human to attend the Interstellar Military Academy. That honor belonged to a woman named Chen, who had graduated 2 cycles prior with honors and had not broken anyone in the process, which everyone agreed was very considerate of her. Marcus was, however, the first human in this particular class, which meant he was the first human most of these cadets had encountered in person. The reputation of his species had preceded him like a warning klaxon. He did not look particularly dangerous, which was part of the problem. Humans rarely did. At 1.8 meters tall and 82 kilograms, he fell right in the middle of galactic average for bipedal species. His features were what Federation databases clinically described as endoskeletal primate baseline, which meant he had forward-facing eyes, a flat face, and skin that came in a variety of beige tones. His particular shade suggested ancestors who had lived somewhere sunny. His dark hair was cut short in military standard, and his expression carried that specific type of friendly anxiety that came from knowing everyone was nervous around you. "Anyone?" Marcus asked, looking around with hopeful brown eyes that several species found unsettling. Predator eyes, forward-facing, built for tracking prey. Never mind that humans had not been persistent predators for thousands of years. Evolution left its marks. The cadets found sudden interest in their footwear, or foot equivalents, or hovering mechanism maintenance. Vexthor watched this display with barely concealed amusement, his exoskeleton clicking softly as he shifted weight. Here was an opportunity, gift-wrapped and vulnerable. The human had been making everyone nervous for weeks with his mere presence, with whispered stories about Deathworld durability and alarming grip strength. Someone needed to put things in perspective, to show these worried cadets that reputation was just that. Reputation, not reality. "I will spar with the human," Vexthor announced, his voice carrying across the gymnasium with theatrical clarity. The room did not exactly go silent, that would be too dramatic, but there was a definite decrease in ambient noise as heads turned and conversations paused mid-sentence. Jukara's skin flickered to a concerned yellow-green. "Vexthor, perhaps it would be better if she began." "I am qualified, Lieutenant." Vexthor interrupted smoothly. "And someone needs to integrate our Deathworld colleague into standard training. Better to do it now under controlled conditions than wait for an accident during field exercises." The logic was sound enough that Jakara could not immediately refute it, though her color continued to express doubt. Marcus, for his part, looked relieved to have a partner, which several observers later remarked was either endearing or ominous, depending on your perspective. "All right," Marcus said, moving to the center of the sparring circle with an easy stride. "Thanks for volunteering. I will try to keep it gentle." Several cadets who understood human vocal inflection caught the genuine concern in that statement. Vexthor heard only condescension. His exoskeleton darkened slightly, a Centauri response to annoyance. "How thoughtful," Vexthor replied, his tone dripping with sarcasm as he took his position opposite Marcus. "Do try to keep up." The standard sparring circle at the academy was 10 meters in diameter, marked with luminescent tape that would register touches via sensor integration. Both fighters wore Academy standard training gear, flexible bodysuits that monitored vital signs and would alert medical if anything concerning happened. The suits also contained the touch sensors that would register points. It was all very civilized, very safe, very controlled. Jakara positioned herself at the edge of the circle, her tablet ready to score. Standard contact. Rules. Strikes must be pulled to light contact only. Grappling allowed but release immediately upon tap or verbal submission. Understood. Understood. Both fighters confirmed. Marcus with a nod and Vex Thor with a formal salute that was mostly for show. Begin. Vex Thor moved first, as everyone expected. His combat style was the Zentarii classical approach. Fast, precise, using the natural armor of his exoskeleton to absorb hits while delivering rapid counterattacks. He came in with a testing jab toward Marcus's midsection, quick but not committed, reading his opponent's response. Marcus stepped back smoothly, his feet moving in the boxer's shuffle that was apparently instinctive to his species. His hands came up in a loose guard, and he watched Vex Thor with the calm focus of someone who had done this many times before. The Zentarii pressed forward with a combination, jab jab cross, his movements textbook perfect. Marcus slipped the first two and absorbed the third on his forearm, the touch registering a point for Vex Thor. The human did not seem bothered by this development. Good hit, Marcus said amiably. Vex Thor did not respond verbally, but increased his pace, circling now, looking for openings. The human's defense was solid, which was mildly irritating. His footwork was efficient, economical. He was not fighting back, though, just defending, and that was insulting. As if the human was afraid of hurting him, as if Vex Thor needed to be handled with care. You are allowed to strike back, Vex Thor said, letting his annoyance show. Or are you afraid? Marcus smiled, which several observers noted did not reach his eyes. Humans did that sometimes, smiled with their mouths, while their eyes said something entirely different. Just getting warmed up. The exchange continued for another 30 seconds, Vex Thor pressing the attack, Marcus defending and occasionally countering with light taps that registered points. The score was 3-2 in Vex Thor's favor, which should have been satisfying, but somehow was not. The human was not trying. That was obvious to anyone watching. He moved like someone very, very aware of his own strength and very, very careful about using it. And that, right there, was what pushed Vex Thor from annoyed to angry. He did not need the Deathworlder's protection. He did not need to be handled carefully, like he was fragile. He was Zentarii, top of his class, assistant combat instructor, and he would not be patronized. The next combination came faster, harder, with less control. A strike toward the head that was not particularly pulled, a sweep toward the legs that had real force behind it. These were not light contact anymore, these were statements. Marcus's expression shifted, his smile disappearing, his eyes narrowing slightly. Hey, maybe we should. Vex Thor did not let him finish. He saw an opening, or thought he did, in the human's distracted moment. He stepped in hard, throwing a hook toward Marcus's jaw, putting real power behind it, determined to prove a point about who belonged in this gymnasium and who was just a novelty. What happened next took approximately 0.3 seconds, which was not enough time for conscious thought but plenty of time for instinct. Marcus's hand came up in a basic defensive movement, the kind taught to beginners across dozens of martial traditions. A simple parry, redirecting the incoming strike away from his face. His palm met Vex Thor's extended arm and pushed it aside with what Marcus's muscle memory considered minimal force. The kind of force you would use on a training partner you did not want to hurt. The problem, the fundamental incompatibility that nobody had properly calculated, was that minimal force for a human was not minimal force for a Zentarii. Marcus's palm connected with Vex Thor's forearm, and the Zentarii exoskeleton, which could withstand standard combat pressures and had served Vex Thor perfectly well for 23 cycles, experienced what engineers would later describe as catastrophic structural failure. The arm bent wrong, snapped, and the momentum of Vex Thor's own strike combined with the redirecting force carried his broken arm directly into his own face. The sound was not pleasant. Exoskeleton meeting exoskeleton at speed rarely is. Vex Thor's nose, which was already somewhat pronounced by Zentarii standards, inverted, his cheekbone, or the Zentarii equivalent thereof, shattered into several distinct pieces. His jaw dislocated with an audible pop that made several observers feel suddenly queasy. One of his compound eyes suffered immediate trauma as bone fragments went places. Bone fragments should never go. Vex Thor dropped like someone had cut his power supply, which, metaphorically speaking, pain had done. He hit the mat making sounds that transcended language barriers, universal expressions of agony that needed no translation. The gymnasium, which had been filled with the ambient noise of multiple sparring matches, went absolutely silent. Every cadet, every instructor, every being present stopped what they were doing and stared at the Zentarii writhing on the ground. His face, which had been perfectly arranged moments before, now resembling abstract art of the particularly disturbing variety. Marcus stood frozen, his hand still extended from the parry, his expression cycling through confusion, horror, and dawning realization. "I barely touched him," he said to nobody in particular. "I was being gentle." Zukara was already moving, her training overriding her shock, her tablet activating emergency medical protocols. Medical team to gymnasium, 3, immediate emergency, facial trauma, Zentarii physiology. Her skin had gone pure white, the quelling expression of absolute panic. 2 cadets near Vex Thor tried to help him, then hesitated, unsure where to touch when everything visible seemed damaged. Green ichor was leaking from multiple points on the Zentarii's face, pooling on the mat in a way that was going to give several students nightmares. The medical team arrived in under 2 minutes, which was admirably fast. They came with a hover stretcher and scanning equipment, and the calm efficiency of professionals who had seen everything. Though, as they would later admit over drinks, they had not seen many training accidents quite this spectacular. What happened? The lead medic, a thoraxian named Krell, with 4 arms and a no-nonsense attitude, demanded as his team stabilized Vex Thor's neck and began loading him onto the stretcher. "Sparring accident," Zukara said, her voice steady despite her color. The human was defending, standard parry, and she gestured helplessly at Vex Thor's face. Krell's multiple eyes swiveled to look at Marcus, who was standing exactly where he had been, looking like he desperately wished he could disappear. "You did this with a parry." "I did not mean to," Marcus said quietly. "I was trying to be careful." "We will discuss it later," Krell said, which sounded ominous, but was actually just medical efficiency. He had a patient to save, and discussions could wait until faces were properly arranged. "Everyone clear back. Let us work." They rushed Vex Thor out of the gymnasium on the stretcher, his moans echoing down the corridor. The remaining cadets stood in uncomfortable clusters, looking at each other, looking at Marcus, looking at the green ichor staining the mat, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Marcus sat down heavily on a nearby bench, his head in his hands. "I was being gentle," he repeated to himself. "I swear I was being gentle." A small Quellan cadet named Pipri, who had more courage than sense, approached carefully. "We believe you," she said, her skin showing sympathetic purple hues. "Your species files say you are much stronger than you appear." "The files do not explain it right," Marcus said without looking up. "They make it sound like we are just a bit tougher, a bit stronger. They do not explain how different the baseline is." He looked up, his eyes troubled. "I have been holding back in every training session. Every single one. That was me holding back." That statement landed in the gymnasium like a physical weight, and suddenly several things made more sense. The way Marcus moved carefully through crowded corridors, the way he opened doors with excessive caution, the way he shook hands like he was handling eggs, the way he never ever used full force in any training scenario, even when it cost him points or rankings. "How much were you holding back?" Pipri asked, her natural Quellan curiosity overcoming her caution. Marcus considered this. "In that parry, maybe 10% of what I could have done. Maybe less." The implications of that statement spread through the assembled cadets like a cold wind. If that was 10%, then full strength would have been Nobody wanted to finish that thought. In the medical bay 3 levels down, Vextor was receiving the kind of attention usually reserved for shuttle crash survivors. The trauma bay had erupted into controlled chaos the moment the stretcher came through the doors. Medical personnel swarming with scanners and stabilizers and enough pharmaceutical intervention to sedate a small army. "Get me a facial reconstruction team," Krell ordered, his 4 arms working simultaneously on different injuries. "And someone contact Dr. Zixvara, we need the microsurgery specialist. This is beyond standard trauma repair." The lead surgeon, a Vortelian named Shimmering Dawn of the Seventh Sky, which everyone shortened to Dawn, floated over in her containment suit. Her gaseous form swirled with colors, indicating professional concern. How bad? 17 distinct fractures in the facial structure, complete nasal collapse, orbital bone fragmentation, jaw dislocation, and significant soft tissue damage, Krell reported, reading from his scanner. The good news is none of it is life-threatening. The bad news is he looks like he went through a recycling compressor. Dawn floated closer to examine the patient, her sensory apparatus extending from her suit. "This was a sparring accident with the human cadet," Dawn said, which somehow conveyed understanding, sympathy, and a touch of inevitability. "I wondered when we would see one of these. Begin Reconstruction Protocol 7. We will need to rebuild basically everything from the cheekbones forward." The medical team moved with practiced coordination, each member knowing their role in the complex dance of trauma surgery. Vextor was sedated deeply enough that he would remember none of this, which was a mercy. Conscious beings did not need to experience their own faces being disassembled and rebuilt. The reconstruction process began with skeletal mapping, scanners creating a precise, 3-dimensional model of what Vextor's skull structure should look like. The Federation Medical Database had templates for every known species, and the computers could generate a perfect reference for comparison. Every fragment of broken bone was located, cataloged, and prepared for reintegration. Then came the nanobots, billions of microscopic machines injected directly into the damaged tissue. These were the true miracle of modern medicine, programmable robots, smaller than cells that could work at the molecular level. They swarmed through the wreckage of Vextor's face like the world's most efficient construction crew, grabbing bone fragments and moving them back into position with mathematical precision. "Skeletal realignment at 40%, one technician called out. "Soft tissue regeneration initialized," another reported. Dawn coordinated the entire operation with the calm expertise of someone who had done this hundreds of times. Her species processed information differently than most, their gaseous brains capable of tracking multiple surgical processes simultaneously. She monitored the nanobots, directed the tissue, regenerators, and calculated medication dosages all at once. The bone fragments were guided back into place and fused with medical-grade adhesives that would, over the next few days, be replaced by natural bone growth. The nanobots worked at the cellular level, stimulating Vextor's own healing processes, accelerating what would naturally take months into a process that would take less than an hour. His nasal structure was rebuilt from the inside out, cartilage and bone reformed into their proper configuration. His orbital bones were pieced together like a puzzle, each fragment fitting perfectly into its predetermined position. "Skeletal reconstruction at 90%, the technician updated. Beginning dermal regeneration." The soft tissue damage was in some ways easier and in some ways harder. Easier, because tissue could be regrown relatively simply with the right cellular scaffolding. Harder because getting the exact right color and texture match required artistic precision as much as medical skill. Dawn had done this before, though, and her sensory apparatus could detect differences in tissue composition that other species would miss entirely. Layer by layer, Vextor's face was rebuilt. New skin was grown over the repaired structure, matched perfectly to his existing tone and texture. His compound eye, which had suffered damage, was repaired cell by cell, each photoreceptor tested and confirmed functional. His jaw was relocated, and the muscles reattached with tiny surgical lasers that could work at the millimeter scale. 45 minutes since we started, Krell noted, checking the chronometer. Remarkable time, Dawn. I had excellent scans to work from, Dawn replied, her colors showing modest satisfaction. And the patient is young and healthy. His cellular regeneration coefficient is high. Another 10 minutes, and we will be finished. True to her prediction, 55 minutes after Vexthor had been rushed into the trauma bay looking like the victim of a terrible accident, the last of the nanobots completed their work. Dawn performed a final scan, comparing the results to the original template, and found less than 1% deviation, most of that within normal biological variance. Reconstruction complete, Dawn announced. No permanent damage. He will have some soreness for a few days, and we will want to monitor for infection, but structurally, he is perfect. You would never know anything happened. The medical team allowed themselves a moment of collective satisfaction. This was what they trained for, what their technology was built for. The ability to undo catastrophic injury as if it had never occurred. Modern medicine was not about preventing death. That was easy. Modern medicine was about preventing inconvenience. Vexthor was moved to a recovery room, still deeply sedated, his face now exactly as it had been before the sparring match. Perfect, unmarked, and completely unaware of the hour of frantic reconstruction it had required. Back in the medical bay's break room, the team filed incident reports and tried to decompress from the adrenaline of emergency surgery. So, the human did this with a defensive move? One of the younger medics asked, still processing the disparity between cause and effect. According to the report, a standard parry. Krell confirmed, his multiple arms working on 4 different data pads simultaneously. He redirected an incoming strike, and the patient essentially punched himself with his own redirected force. And the human claims he was being gentle. The human claims he was being gentle. Krell agreed. There was a moment of silence, as everyone in the room contemplated that statement and its implications. We need better protocols for Deathworlder integration, Dawn said finally, her colors showing thoughtful orange and blue patterns. This was foreseeable. The strength differential is documented. We should have had specific guidelines for cross-species sparring. We do have guidelines, Krell pointed out. Standard light contact protocols. The problem is that light contact means different things to different species. So we need species-specific protocols, Dawn countered. For humans specifically, they need different training parameters. Probably separate sparring groups, at least initially. The conversation continued, professional and pragmatic, turning a near disaster into a learning opportunity. This was how the Federation worked, after all. Identify problems, develop solutions, implement changes. Everything could be managed with proper protocols. While the medical team filed reports and Vexor slept peacefully in his recovery bed, the Academy administration was having a very different conversation. Commander Talvik, a Thoraxian who had served in the Federation military for 40 cycles and had seen more than his share of diplomatic incidents, sat behind his desk and tried to decide if this situation was a disaster or just a particularly complicated training incident. The difference mattered for paperwork purposes. Lieutenant Jaccara stood before him, her skin cycling through nervous color patterns. Next to her, looking distinctly uncomfortable, stood Marcus Webb, still in his training clothes, his posture, the military standard of attention, but his expression suggesting he would rather be literally anywhere else. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Talvik said, his voice carrying the natural resonance of his species. During a standard sanctioned sparring match, you, Cadet Webb, performed a defensive maneuver that resulted in your opponent suffering 17 fractures and requiring immediate reconstructive surgery. Yes, sir, Marcus confirmed quietly. And this defensive maneuver was, to use Lieutenant Jacara's words, a basic parry, nothing exotic, nothing advanced. Just a standard defensive technique. Yes, sir. And you were, in your own estimation, using approximately 10% of your strength. Maybe less, sir. Talvik leaned back in his chair, which creaked under his considerable weight. He had commanded troops across 6 sectors, negotiated peace treaties between hostile species, and once personally disabled an insurgent bombing with 30 seconds on the timer. He was not a being easily rattled, but this situation was presenting challenges he had not anticipated. Cadet Webb, he said finally. Do you understand why this is a problem? Yes, sir. I injured another cadet during training. That is unacceptable regardless of intent. No, Talvik interrupted. I mean yes, that is a problem, but it is not the problem. The problem is that you injured another cadet while trying not to injure him, while actively attempting to use minimal force. That is the problem. Marcus said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would improve the situation. Lieutenant, your assessment? Talvik asked, turning to Jakara. Sir, I believe Cadet Webb was acting in good faith. His defensive movement was appropriate and necessary given the incoming strike. The force used appeared minimal from my observation. The issue is that our training protocols do not account for the extreme differential in baseline strength between humans and most other species. The extreme differential, Talvik repeated. Quantify that for me. Jakara pulled up a datapad and read from it. Human bone density is approximately 2.3 times galactic average. Muscle fiber density is 1.8 times average. Reaction speed under adrenaline conditions is significantly enhanced compared to most species. Impact resistance is, she paused, checking the numbers again to make sure she had read them correctly. Impact resistance is approximately 4 times galactic average. 4 times, Talvik said flatly. Yes, sir. Humans evolved on a high-gravity Deathworld with megafauna predators and environmental hazards that required significant physical durability. Their entire physiology is overbuilt for the galactic standard environment. Talvik turned his attention back to Marcus. Is this accurate, Cadet? I am not a biologist, sir, but yes, more or less. Earth is classified as a Class 12 Deathworld. Everything there is kind of built heavier, stronger gravity, more aggressive environment, higher oxygen content in the atmosphere. We had to be tough or we died out. And yet you applied to a military academy where you would be training alongside species that are, forgive my bluntness, fragile compared to your baseline. Sir, I applied because I wanted to serve. The Federation accepted Earth as a member species. I thought I could contribute. I have been careful. I have been so careful. Marcus's voice carried genuine frustration. I have held back in every training scenario, every single one. I move slowly around others. I watch my grip strength. I practice with resistance bands in my quarters to maintain conditioning without risking the equipment. I have been doing everything I can think of to not be dangerous. And yet here we are, Talvik said, but not unkindly. With Assistant Instructor Vexthor in medical recovery. Yes, sir. The commander was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Finally he made a decision. Lieutenant Jakara, I want you to work with medical and develop new training protocols for Deathworld species. Separate sparring groups initially, specialized equipment, different standards for contact, whatever we need to make this work safely. Yes, sir, Jakara said, her skin showing relieved green tones. Cadet Webb, you are not being disciplined. This was an accident, resulting from inadequate protocols, not from negligence or malice. However, until we have those new protocols in place, you are restricted from contact training with non-Deathworld species. Understood? Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Dismissed, both of you. They left the office together, Shkara's color gradually returning to normal, Marcus still looking troubled. It was not your fault, Zerkara said as they walked down the corridor. It was my hand that broke his face, Marcus countered. It was his decision to escalate beyond training protocols, and it was the Academy's failure to provide appropriate guidelines. You were defending yourself appropriately. The only thing you did wrong was exist at the wrong place on the strength scale. Marcus managed a small smile at that. That is a diplomatic way of saying I am too strong for my own good. You are too strong for everyone else's good. Zukara corrected. There is a difference. We will figure this out, Cadet. The Federation has integrated species with extreme environmental adaptations before. Humans are not the first challenge we have faced. But we might be the first challenge that breaks faces by accident. True, Zikara admitted, her skin showing amused yellow flecks. That is a notable distinction. 3 days later, Vexthor was released from medical with a clean bill of health, and a face that showed absolutely no evidence of his close encounter with human defensive capabilities. He returned to the gymnasium to find that things had changed somewhat in his absence. The sparring areas had been reorganized. There was now a clearly marked section labeled Enhanced Durability Training in 3 languages, where Marcus and 2 other Deathworld species cadets, a heavily armored Kresh and a crystalline Shardvex, were practicing under specialized supervision. They moved with considerably less restraint than Marcus had shown previously, and the impact sounds from their sparring made several nearby cadets flinch reflexively. Vexthor watched for a moment, his pride warring with his common sense. He had reviewed the footage of the sparring match during his recovery. He had seen, with painful clarity, how minimal the contact had been, how carefully Marcus had been moving, how completely outmatched Vexthor had been without ever realizing it. It was a humbling realization, having your face reconstructed because you picked a fight with someone who could break you by accident. The kind of humbling that either destroyed your ego or rebuilt it on more realistic foundations. Marcus noticed him watching and jogged over, his expression cautious. "Hey, how are you feeling?" "Physically, perfect," Vexthor said, touching his face unconsciously. "The medical team does excellent work. Emotionally, significantly less perfect. Look, I am really sorry about." "Do not apologize," Vexthor interrupted. "I reviewed the footage. You were restraining yourself the entire match. I was the one who escalated. I was the one who threw an unauthorized strike at your head. You defended yourself, as you were trained to do. The only thing you did wrong was be stronger than I had calculated." "Still," Marcus said, "I could have pulled the parry more. I should have just taken the hit, and taught me that I could attack you with impunity. That would have been a worse lesson in the long term." Vexthor straightened his posture, bringing himself to something like attention. "I owe you an apology. I approached that sparring match with arrogance and disrespect. I treated you as a problem to be solved rather than as a fellow cadet deserving of professional courtesy. That was wrong." Marcus blinked, clearly not having expected that. Apology accepted. Good." Vexthor allowed himself a small smile. "I also wanted to ask, once I am cleared to return to full training, if you would be willing to help develop the new protocols. Your perspective on strength management would be valuable." "You want my help? After I broke your face?" "You broke my face by accident while defending yourself from my poor decisions. That demonstrates precisely the kind of control we need to document and teach. So yes, I want your help." They shook hands, carefully, both of them very aware of grip strength differentials now. It was not quite friendship, but it was professional respect, which was sometimes more valuable in a military context. Over the following weeks, the new protocols took shape. Humans and other Deathworld species got specialized training schedules with reinforced equipment and carefully calibrated sparring partners. The regular training rotation continued for standard durability species. Cross-training happened under strict supervision with extensive safety protocols. It was not perfect, but it worked. Marcus became something of an ambassador for human capabilities, explaining patiently to curious cadets about Earth's gravity, about persistence hunting, about why humans had seemingly ridiculous numbers of redundant organs. He demonstrated, carefully, the difference between human casual strength and human actual strength. He taught other cadets about human tells, the ways you could read when a human was getting angry or scared, because those were the times when their strength became unpredictable. The academy adapted, as institutions do when given no choice. The cafeteria started serving Earth food, which most species found horrifyingly spiced, but which Marcus appreciated with genuine gratitude. The gymnasium got reinforced equipment that could handle Deathworld training loads. The medical bay updated its protocols for treating humans, who apparently required different approaches for nearly everything. And in the officers' ready room, over drinks one evening, Commander Talvik and Lieutenant Jakara reviewed the final incident reports. 17 fractures repaired in 55 minutes. Talvik read from his datapad. Complete reconstruction, with no permanent damage. Modern medicine truly is remarkable.